and is outfitted with a face guard and gloves. Surrounding them are troves of others that are commanded to scream and yell obscenities at them. While this is taking place, specific students will be chosen to compete against the bully in numerous fistfights until school staff decided that they were sufficiently injured. No one was safe from the ring either. Some bore pre-existing injuries, some were much smaller than their opponent, and some were even pregnant. Even worse, things seemed to be treated like a game, with superiors commentating on the matches like they were on TV. In reality, though, this was the furthest thing from TV. This was handcrafted abuse. Alon was meticulous about orchestrating fights for the ring, too. It's been noted that certain students would regularly be punished for another's actions, effectively engineering anger between them. This was often noticed between big brothers and their subordinates, as they'd be punished for the actions of their newer counterparts. And once they were angry enough, a ring fight would commence, often injuring students so badly that they'd sustain permanent brain damage, PTSD, and even death.
It costs $17,400 to send the average youngster to Elan for 1 year. Even at that price, there are judges, social workers, and parents who consider it a bargain. Elan's defenders claim it has the most consistently effective program for salvaging young people who are too difficult for other facilities to handle. So many states want to use Elan that there's a waiting list. But on the other hand, one state agency in Massachusetts will no longer send their youngsters here because they object to the way the children are treated. One reason is the use of physical punishment. Joe, you make no bones about it. There is corporal punishment here at Elan. Tell us about it. What are the stages it comes in? Who's it administered by?
Well, it's administered by the kids, first of all. And corporal, it's a harsh term. Okay, what it is we have the ring, okay, which everybody misinterprets. It's not a boxing ring, it's a ring of human people. The bully is introduced as what he is. In this corner is the bully who's trying to turn this facility into a detention center. Okay, and in this corner is the house champion who's going to show him why it can't be done. And that's exactly how it does. And we never allow the bully to win.
The girls get put in the ring too.
Well, girls bully as well as boys do. I mean, we're a equal rights facility. We also use spanking, which is symbolic. Again, it's a last resort. Okay, and it's one resident spanking another resident, and it's done with a ping pong paddle. Okay, and usually a person won't get spanked more than once or twice. But it's a symbolic thing, which is if you're going to act like a baby, you should be treated like a baby.
On December 27, 1982, a 15-year-old Elan student named Philip Williams was placed into the ring. He wasn't the largest kid there, but he was known to do what he could to put up a fight. He had grown up in a family of division, regularly witnessing his father physically abuse his mother. With this, there was an anger within him, a sadness that Elan noticed and wanted to exploit. And so, that evening, a ring session commenced with Phil as the bully. There was fight after fight after fight. In the end, it's been reported that he was beaten up so badly that he fell flat on the floor, and it took an entire 20 minutes before an ambulance was called to help him. 20 minutes or so they called the ambulance. They took Phil and they never saw him again. His sister claims, "I thought it was a wonderful place. I thought they were helping my brother. I thought he was coming home. He came home all right. In a box." Elan's official response was that he had regularly faked headaches. The cause of death? A brain aneurysm. And no charges ever filed against them. It's been clear to us from the beginning that Elan is not a place of good. From humiliation to beratement to physical abuse, Elan's tactics were archaic and inhumane. For a school that markets itself on academia, on helping students get their lives back on track, It's crystal clear that this has never been the motive. What I find interesting, though, is that Alon wasn't even the first to utilize this type of therapy, this attack therapy. In fact, it has its roots in a cult that found its footing all the way back in the mid-1950s. That cult is one by the name of Synanon.
With a warrant to investigate reports of child abuse.
In recent years, Synanon began calling itself a religion.
He's 52 years old. He's deaf in one ear. He's an egomaniac. But one of the wisest persons that I've ever met in my life. He knows how to get people moving. He creates turbulence.
Gentlemen, until further notice, no member of the California Department of Corrections is permitted on Synanon property unless he has the express permission of Charles Dieterich, Chairman, Synanon.
In early 1958, a man by the name of Charles Dieterich Sr. would found the group in Santa Monica, California. It was intended to be a drug rehabilitation program aimed at delinquents. However, in the years that followed, it appeared to stray from that mission entirely. The distinguishing form of therapy employed by Synanon was something called the game, which, in today's terms, is more commonly known as attack therapy. The focus of the game was to break down the social construct of an individual's mind by first allowing them to open up about themselves before commencing an aggressive beratement session, much like we discussed earlier with general meetings. The primary goal was to recreate someone's personality and sense of self by completely demolishing everything they know about themselves before rebuilding them as a newer, subjectively better person. It hinged on the brink of legality while being entirely immoral. And, not surprisingly, by 1991, the cult would disband due to criminal convictions that caught up to many of their members. The founder also died just 6 years later, leaving behind a dark legacy that, to this day, is known as one of the most dangerous and violent cults that America has ever seen. This is, of course, the abridged history. To be honest with you, I could make an entire hour-long video on the operations and practices of Synanon, but that's a story for another day. If there's one takeaway tonight, though, it's that it unknowingly served as an inspiration and blueprint for other institutions to follow. One of those being Alon, and by utilizing similar practices, they appeared to carry the torch that Synanon was forced to abandon. They knew they had to keep up appearances too, thriving off an immaculate public image, spearheaded by the charisma of Joe Ritchie. Before the age of the internet, admittedly this was easier to do. Television documentaries like NBC's For the Child's Own Good were seemingly the only inside look that the public was allowed to gain. However, even they failed to convey the true extent of what happened there. The hush-hush foundation that Alon was built upon initially seemed to be unbreakable. However, due to a rise in public attention that would soon find its way there, it was becoming increasingly apparent that the cracks beneath that very foundation were merely beginning to form. Through the late 70s and into the early 80s, reports of the true nature of Alon began to spread by word of mouth from former students. Authorities in Maine reportedly visited the school upwards of 12 times to investigate, however returned with absolutely nothing to show for it. Frustratingly, the operation that Joe Ritchie was running was completely and entirely legal. There were no laws in place for facilities like this, so it was allowed to remain in operation without issue. As we touched on, the media was the primary in for outsiders at Alon. However, even they failed to communicate the extent of their operations. While they showed select parts of it, unfortunately Joe Ritchie was given enough airtime to convince the public and the news crew that it was nothing more than their treatment taking place. By dehumanizing the students, emphasizing their delinquencies on national television, He was able to use this notoriety to his advantage, ultimately swaying the public opinion into believing that what he was doing was entirely good. On top of the growing number of alumni, though, came an increase in escapees, which only furthered Alon's unwanted infamy. Over the years, 3 students, a 16-year-old unidentified individual, a 15-year-old Brad Glickman, and a 17-year-old Don Birnbaum would all escape successfully, however would meet wildly differing fates. For the 16-year-old, it's been reported that he ran over 15 miles through the wilderness in the middle of the night. He was eventually caught by an officer, Max Ashburn, and after hearing the boy's story and observing his physical condition, he helped him return home. For Brad Glickman, he was shot. In 1990, after escaping Alon's search parties, he made his way to a house in a small town. Authorities believed that he had a connection to the girl that lived there. However, the homeowner opened fire, ultimately killing him. And for Dawn Birnbaum, she too had escaped the clutches of Alon, eventually finding a trucker named James Cruz who was willing to take her home. A few hours down the road, though, Birnbaum would find that Cruz's true intentions weren't quite so virtuous. As it turned out, he sexually assaulted her on the side of the highway before strangling and abandoning her body between routes 26 and 550 in Pennsylvania. She was discovered by another motorist with a yellow rope tied around her neck and without clothes from the waist down. And from her corpse were tire tracks resembling that of a semi-trailer. Since Birnbaum had crossed state lines, an FBI investigation was commenced for her, and after cross-checking with numerous similar cases that have happened in the area, the truck belonging to James Cruz was deemed as the culprit. Upon catching up to him and searching his vehicle, authorities were able to find but a single blonde hair that belonged to Birnbaum, effectively leading to his arrest. Much to the school's displeasure, these cases successfully gained ample attention. Joe Ritchie resultingly paid off numerous judges and journalists in hopes of drowning out the negative press. However, outsiders were beginning to catch on that these students were running for a reason. On the night of October 30th, 1975, a 15-year-old girl named Martha Moxley was out with her friends participating in what they call Mischief Night. This typically involved TPing houses, ding-dong ditching, typical teenager antics. Later that night, Moxley found a liking to a Thomas Skakel, eventually kissing him before the pair decided to venture off. To the other friends in their group, seeing Moxley fall over the Skakel's backyard fence with Thomas was the very last time that they would ever see her alive. The next morning, the Moxley family awakens as usual. They go about their morning routine, however notice that Martha is missing. Upon searching the house for her, they notice a body lying by the tree out in the backyard. They approach it and discover a grim scene. Martha is lying, lifeless with her pants down. Her body appears to have been visibly beaten, and a few feet away from the body, broken remnants of a 6-iron golf club. This club was eventually traced back to the Skakel family. Autopsy reports claim that she was bludgeoned and stabbed to death, all by that 6-iron. And since Thomas Skakel was the last person she was spotted with that night, he was the prime suspect in her murder. Due to a lack of sufficient evidence, however, he, along the other suspects, were eventually absolved. And as a result, the Moxley case, frustratingly, went cold. Years later. Thomas's 18-year-old brother named Michael Skakel was arrested for drunk driving. His punishment? admission to Elan. While there, Skakel was known to be problematic and outspoken. According to Elan students at the time, he would regularly boast about a girl named Martha and how he sexually assaulted and killed her. One student named Gregory Coleman recalls this vividly, recounting how Michael had gone on record to state that, "I'm going to get away with murder. I'm a Kennedy." The Kennedy reference was alluding to his relation to Robert F. Kennedy, something that would prove pivotal in launching his eventual trial to the national spotlight. At the time of his confession, though, nobody could do anything about it. Given the overbearing nature of the rules set at school, any student that tried to tell someone about this was quickly reprimanded. It would take an entire 22 years before Skakel's actions would reach the public eye. In January of 2000, he was arrested and charged with the murder of Martha Moxley, and due to his relation to the Kennedys, it was a case that commanded the airwaves. Since Skakel's primary vehicle of bragging about his crimes was Elan, this, by proxy, had also thrust the school into the national spotlight. Dozens of students took the stand, exposing the callousness that occurred there. The humiliation, the general meetings, the beatings, the ring, the deaths, all of it was brought into the public eye. Realizing this, Joe Ritchie did everything he possibly could to keep discussion about his operation to a minimum. He eventually took the stand, downplaying any mention of Elan, touting its high success rate, and doing everything he possibly could to divert the attention back to Skakel, and Skakel only. But this was only marginally effective, as this was in the 2000s. An interconnected era of information, catalyzed by a little something called the internet. Michael Skakel was eventually found guilty of the murder and was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. After serving just 11 years behind bars, he was granted a new trial in 2013, in which he was let go after posting a $1.2 million bond. Today, he walks a free man. But back then, the cat was out of the bag. The inhumanities committed at the Elan School were documented in one of the most high-profile cases in decades. And because of this, people began talking, theorizing, and investigating, effectively marking the beginning of the end of Joe Ritchie's iron grip on the hundreds of students that were helpless beneath him.
You've seen us go to a lot of places where family was being victimized by extremely dark forces. The only people that they...
But with his weakening grasp on the media surrounding his operation came a different hurdle that Joe Ritchie would soon have to overcome. In June of 2000, he was diagnosed with lung cancer caused by his well-known addiction to cigarettes. And just 6 months later, on the 29th of January 2001, Joe Ritchie would pass away in Portland, Maine at 54 years old. As a result, his second wife, Sharon Terry, would take over operations at Elan. It was clear, though, that due to the increased publicity among the rising alumni testimonies, the idea of Terry having a lot of PR work on her plate was putting it lightly. Throughout the years, numerous changes would be put in place in response to outside criticism of the Elan School. For instance, the ring was eventually forbidden from being used as punishment. And while this was substantially a good thing, the other cruelties would remain. What Sharon Terry was unaware of, though, was that due to the rapid rise in technology, namely the internet, even her reign over Elan would soon meet its demise. When the water settled following the Skakel case, mentions of Elan were made in various forums throughout the next few years. They would get people talking, however it wasn't quite enough for definite action. By 2010, though, something would change. A website that we all knew very well would help spearhead one of the most effective exposed stories in the history of the internet. That website was Reddit. On November 26, 2010, a man named Jeff W., who went by Gazaz My Hero, would make a post titled,
You lost, Zone
"Even
A.
skimming this once will blow your mind. Most probably think it's made up, but you'd be dead wrong." Within it, he explains that he was an Elan student in 1998, before outlining in detail the reality of what took place there. They're mostly points that we've already covered and explored in great detail tonight, but back then, these claims were unbelievable. The school was very much still in operation, so some initially had a tough time wrapping their head around the fact that a place like this actually existed. But then came the comments, the other stories from other alumni with their own experiences. Gazaz My Hero's post carried weight. It was real, and these atrocities needed to be known. Eventually, this thread would rack up over 2,000 likes and 1.4 thousand comments. While this may not have caused Elan's closure outright, it aggressively reopened old wounds. 2010 was not 2000. The internet user base was exponentially larger than it had been, and resultingly, the effectiveness of this newfound attention caused a massive amount of backlash that the Elan school had never before experienced. Four months later, on the 23rd of March 2011, the Elan school announced that it would soon be shutting down. Cher and Terry blamed the call on what they deemed to be libelous remarks made about them online. The school has been the target of harsh and false attacks spread over the internet with the avowed purpose of forcing the school to close. The school, unfortunately, has been unable to survive the damage. And on the 1st of April 2011, the Elan school would close its doors for one final time. Officially, they blamed it on declining student numbers in hopes of diverting the attention away from the actual cause. But on the outside, everyone knew the real reason. For students, this was unbelievably good news. However, the damage they endured was something that would remain everlasting. It's been reported that numerous suicides have occurred as a result of attendance at Elan. PTSD with alumni is rampant, and it's clear that the school had done nothing but damage people. A filmmaker and former student named Todd Nilsson, creator of a fantastic Elan documentary named The Last Stop, has gone on record to state that, as a student, he was helped by their unconventional tactics, but he knew the majority of others weren't quite so lucky. Today, hundreds of stories remain online about the cruelty committed at the Elan school, about the facade they upkept for 41 years. Reading through these are eye-opening, and you can find them on nearly every piece of media and documentation that exists about Elan online. To all of you that have shared your stories, that have opened up about the torment you went through, your voice is the reason that Elan ceases to exist today. This video would not exist without you, and I wish I could say that I feel your pain, but I don't.
Your first assignment is the lab.
While there are and have been other facilities like this throughout history, those are another story for another time. The legacy that Elan left behind is a dark one. Knowing the true history of what occurred off Number 5 Road is haunting. And no matter if it forever stands physically, the psychological destruction that it left behind will very unfortunately forever remain.
You captured Zone C. You lost Zone A.
430 million. The amount of monthly active Reddit users worldwide as of December of 2019. A figure of this magnitude has effectively cemented the site as one of the most widely used of all time. And with that comes an incomprehensible melting pot of post topics spanning nearly anything you can think of. As with anything, however, there is a dark side. The shrouded corner of the website, harboring the strangest mysteries, stories, and true crime cases. It's safe to say that I've sunk an embarrassing amount of my life reading threads in this category. But, hey, I guess that just happens when you're fascinated by something. What can you do? Welcome back to Chronicles of Reddit, an anthology series dedicated to diving into the less disturbing and more odd part of Reddit that you might overlook in your day-to-day reading. This is Volume 2, so if you missed the pilot episode, be sure to check that out when you're finished with this one. Without further ado, get comfy, because tonight, we're taking a dive into 3 more bizarre discoveries that have weirded me out. From Reddit.
You captured Zone A.
First up, RBI. A hub for investigative minds to congregate and tackle real-world problems. On July 31st of 2020, a Redditor by the name of SoothBB would reach out to the community and plead for help in finding their coworker. Their post reads the following. On Wednesday, July 22nd, a coworker of mine abruptly up and left work before the end of his shift and hasn't been seen since. 1 week later, a text message is received from him containing only these 3 photos. Does anybody recognize the location shown in these photos? I work at a lab that makes prescription eyeglasses in Northern Ohio. Last week, Wednesday, about 6 hours into our 10-hour shift, a coworker of mine got up from his station in a hurry, left his bag of personal belongings at his desk, and walked out the door and didn't return. No one's seen him since. Some of my other coworkers thought he was just sick of the long hours and decided to quit. But that doesn't make sense why he'd leave behind his personal belongings and not say anything. We tried calling him that same night, and his phone would just ring until it went to voicemail, and by the next morning his phone was turned off. My boss said he got a hold of his mom, and that she hasn't seen or heard from him, but didn't seem too concerned, as she said he had a history of living somewhat of a nomadic lifestyle in his past. She thinks he may have relapsed and owed someone money, or just ran off with some girl. Apparently they aren't very close, and don't have the best relationship. I know he had a history of drug abuse, but from everything I've gathered in the 2 years that I've worked with him, he cleaned his life up after an arrest in 2014 or 2015 for drug possession, and has been clean since. He always acted normal around me, and seemed to be living a productive life. On the subject of the pictures, a couple days ago after work, I received a group text message that was sent to me, 2 of my other coworkers, and 6 other numbers I don't recognize. It was from him, and contained the 3 pictures I linked. No text. I tried calling and it rang once, then went to voicemail. When I called again, it went straight to voicemail. This whole thing got me feeling very uneasy, and I don't know what to think. Does anybody here recognize the location of where these photos might have been taken? As stated, below this was a link to an Imgur album containing more photos. How much more as follows. In strange locations with very apparent motion distortion. It appears that whoever was taking them must have been trying to shoot him on the fly, and very likely could have been attempting to be discreet about it. Camera flash aside. Now, I know the first thing that probably comes to mind here is the potential of EXIF data being embedded within these photos, and considering the fact that it provides critical information, including the GPS location, extracting this from the image and tracking his friend down should be pretty easy peasy, right? Wrong. Unfortunately, a few others have noticed this and suggested looking into it. However, the OP's attempts at doing so didn't bring up anything usable. On top of this, not only were the images that were uploaded to the album on Under not the original photos from the camera that shot them, but the websites and potentially the messaging app Q more than likely stripped the EXIF data from the files, effectively rendering this angle of attack to be useless. A couple hours after this threat was made, a Redditor named Zepazuzu would inquire on if the police were notified, to which Sooth responded, "Son, that's what my boss contacted his mom about. She said she was gonna give it some time before doing anything like that because she's absolutely convinced he's fine and just left on his own accord. Her lack of concern is kind of mind-blowing, to be honest. If my kid up and left leaving behind a bag of personal possessions, I'd contact the police ASAP. We talked about calling the police ourselves, but my boss ultimately said it wasn't our place since we aren't kin, and that should be left to his family." Not sure about you, but this seems a bit off. I don't doubt Sooth's claims here. However, leaving only his mother with the sole authority to file a missing persons report or contact the police seems a bit odd to me. Personally, if a friend or coworker of mine were to up and vanish after leaving all their personal belongings behind like they've done, red flags would be going up everywhere. If I were them, I'd be filing a report regardless. Anyway, in the sea of speculation and theories into this post, two users, Maxilla the Destroyer and Mashed Potatoes, would present nearly identical theories that stand out among the others. For brevity, we'll just take a look at the one from Mash. My phone has a feature where if I hit the lock button 3 times really fast, it'll send a series of 3 photos to whatever contacts I've approved. The phone I just got will send 3 from the front camera, 3 from the back, and I think a couple of seconds of audio recording. It's for emergency situations. My old phone would send just 3 from the front-facing camera. Is it possible this is what's happening? Now this. This is a contender I'm willing to get behind, considering the fact that Sooth and a few others all received these 3 photos in tandem. If we assume that their coworker utilized this SOS feature potentially built into their smartphone, then it leaves the door open to just 2 options. Either they're completely fine and did this by accident, or they were or are legitimately in trouble and needed help. But then again, that brings us straight back to the root of this mystery. Regardless of what happened, Sooth unfortunately never followed up with an update on if they ever returned, if a report was eventually filed, or if they ever got into contact with them, leaving the door on this conundrum wide open for speculation. If you, or anyone you know, recognizes these spots from Northern Ohio, drop a comment. It's a long shot, but perhaps we can help Sooth put their newfound dilemma to bed, while helping to bring their friend home. Stop 2. Legal advice. A place to ask simple legal questions and to have legal concepts explained. On the morning of February 7th of 2017, a Redditor by the name of BabyBlues17 would jump into the conversation, explaining and inquiring on an unfortunate dilemma that they found themselves wrapped up in. Their post is titled, "I'm pregnant being investigated by DCS," and reads the following. Hello. I'm 29 years old, happily married. My husband and I are college educated, have respectable, stable jobs, and own a home in a nice neighborhood. We're basically as prepared as anyone can be to start a family. I'm almost 9 months pregnant with our first child. The problem is that 11 years ago, when my husband was a freshman in college, he was arrested for possession of marijuana. It was a large enough amount that he was charged with a Class D felony, but not intent to deal. He pled guilty and did his time in probation without a problem, passing every drug test along the way. He has not touched marijuana since, and we rarely even drink. I have no criminal record and have never done drugs myself. It was a stupid mistake he made as a foolish 18-year-old, and he's worked hard to put it behind him. Someone has apparently contacted child services in our area and informed them that we are drug users. This accusation is being taken very seriously because of my husband's record. We've been as cooperative as could be with our caseworker. We've been interviewed, our home has been examined, and she found nothing remotely suspicious or incriminating. We have both taken a drug test and passed. Our caseworker says that everything looks fine so far. Unfortunately, she also says that there's still a possibility that our child could be taken from us in the labor and delivery ward, and that we won't be allowed to take her home. I was devastated and horrified to hear that. When I asked why, she said it was not up to her, and we'll have to wait and see, which made absolutely no sense. What gives? I feel like there's something that she isn't telling me, but I have no experience with DCS and I'm not aware of anything we could have possibly done wrong. I know they'll have to test my daughter for drugs once she's born, but she hasn't been exposed to drugs. Nothing more than prenatal vitamins, not even Tylenol, and I already proved that by passing a drug test. I'm scared and confused.
I like that.
Do I need a lawyer? I'd anticipated spending our savings on our new daughter and parental leave, but I'll use that money for a lawyer if I have to. Thanks for reading, and thanks in advance for your help. Clearly, the actions taken so far by the caseworker are cause for alarm. Receiving news that you're being investigated and might not be able to keep your newborn child would instill anyone with a feeling of overwhelming anxiety. Thankfully, commenters were quick to jump in, offering various tidbits of advice and insight on how she can get this handled. Get a family law attorney on retainer. Maybe contact the local ACLU chapter. This reaction is pretty extreme, and the fact that someone tipped them when you're obviously not using is pretty malicious. Another Redditor named Sudsworthy floated the possibility that the caseworker is potentially complicit in working with the one who made the report. Others, however, had their reservations on the validity of this entire investigation. Indiana DCS does not get involved with pregnancies. Please make sure the person you're talking to is actually DCS, or don't let them in your home anymore. And probably the most substantial comment came from a user named HurryUpMeow, who claimed that they were a former CPS investigator in the OP's data residence. I'm a former Indiana CPS investigator and assessor. Something here is not making any sense at all, unless the law has changed greatly in the last few years when I left the department. As of this moment, you're pregnant, correct? You don't have any children? They're investigating the fetus? To which OP responded, claiming, "Yeah, we have no children yet. They are investigating the fetus." I wasn't aware that was even something they could do. The report they got must have been quite alarming, I guess. It seemed weird as heck to me too. The remainder of the comments, understandably, were incredibly sketched out that this was occurring. It was heavily advised to stop contacting this particular caseworker and to get in contact with a DCS supervisor directly. Hopefully through them, they could get some answers on this. And so the OP went silent for a while. Hours became days, and the thread began to lose a bit of steam, as they always do. Hopefully things were okay. February 21st of 2017. Here's my original post. When I made it, I was advised to get a lawyer right away. I was also advised that Indiana's DCS doesn't investigate pregnant women who don't already have kids, and that the woman claiming to be a social worker might be an imposter. I contacted and met with the lawyer and explained the situation to him. He seemed to agree that something was very fishy. To make a long story short, the woman handling our case has no affiliation with DCS. I'm still in complete shock. We went straight to the police, and they're taking this very seriously. I can't give a lot of details because it's an ongoing investigation, but she seems to have been a very skilled and well-researched liar. I never would have known anything was amiss without the advice of this subreddit and the intervention of my attorney. I feel like a complete idiot, but the instinct to cooperate when faced with an intimidating authority figure is strong. I haven't had the baby yet, and we're staying at a trusted family member's home until the baby's born. My OB and the hospital we'll be delivering at have already been informed of the situation and will be taking the appropriate security measures. I'm still freaking out, but we're taking every precaution for the safety of my child, and hopefully everything will turn out okay. Thanks again, everybody. Truly. Abduction of a newborn is something unfathomable to me. However, after reading this and looking into it, I now know that it is a thing. Go figure. The stats are interesting too. According to an article made by KVUE in Austin, Texas, from 1964 to October of 2019, 327 children under the age of 1 have been abducted in the US. Of those 327 who are abducted, 257 of them were taken by women of childbearing age, between the ages of 14 and 39. A nurse or healthcare worker is more likely to take a child from a healthcare setting, while a babysitter, relative, or friend is more likely to take an infant from a home. Had the OP not raised their suspicions, then who knows what the next step the attempted kidnapper would have taken. Perhaps they'd try to get someone to impersonate a nurse, coming face to face with the OP in the recovery room to abduct their child. It might sound like a long shot, but if they were this dedicated, pursuing a fake DCS case against baby blues, and even coming out to inspect their home, then I wouldn't doubt that they'd pull a stunt like this too. To date, the OP understandably hasn't returned to Reddit. Their story, though, will forever live on in r/legal advice as one of the most bizarre and unsettling occurrences that have been shared there. I'm sure this would make a great personal story one day, but to be honest, if I were them, I'd be happy with just forgetting it. Final stop, r/relationships, the place you go for advice in.
For those of you that aren't familiar with Grammarly, it's a writing assistant that you can easily download as an extension. So it can help you detect spelling and grammar mistakes in your research papers, or even just your emails that you send out on a daily basis. I love how seamless and well organized it is, so it makes it easy for me to understand what I did wrong and how to correct.
Well, your relationships. On Monday, May 23rd of 2016, a Redditor by the name of Losing My Mind 5 would share a story about what they believed to be their husband spying on them when he isn't home. Considering the post received upwards of 6,000 likes and nearly 1.5 thousand comments in just 5 months, it's safe to assume that their story shook some people up. It's deleted now, however thankfully archives exist to remedy situations like this. And it read the following. My husband Henry and I have been married for almost 2 years. Together for 5. We have a pretty normal relationship and have always felt that we share a mutual trust in each other. We've never broken up, and I can't think of one situation where he'd feel that I'm not trustworthy. I feel like I'm going crazy over this. Henry's career usually requires him to travel rarely, but this year is an exception. His company's in the middle of a reorganization, and he's been traveling to do training seminars about once a month. His trips are usually Monday to Sunday. I've confirmed these trips, and yes, they are legitimate. I'd say that we've been handling it well, but the past few months, my husband's been doing weird things that have caused me to believe that he's spying on me or showing controlling tendencies. The first incident was at the end of March when my husband came home and asked me how my friend was doing with the death of her dog. At first, I said she was sad, but doing okay. About a minute later, I asked how he knew that, and he said social media. The only reason I asked was because I had a phone call in the living room with my friend when the dog died. Not only that, but my friend had deactivated her page before the dog died, so it wouldn't have been on there. I'm the only mutual friend he had with her, so I don't think that he'd see anything that she was tagged in. I asked him if he's watching me, as a joke, and he said, "Seriously? Why would you think that?" I explained it, and he said, "No, it was on social media." I just assumed his defensiveness was because he had jet lag. The second incident was in April when I went out with my friends during the weekend. That Saturday night, I texted him that I would let him know when I'm home, and it should be around 12:30 a.m. I got home earlier at about 11 p.m. and fiddled around the kitchen for probably 20 minutes. I'll admit, I forgot to text him. I got a text at about 11:20 that said, "You're home?" I told him yes, that I was straightening the kitchen then going to bed. I asked how he knew, and he said he just figured you would be already. He told me goodnight, and I went to bed. Normally I wouldn't think anything of this, but this latest incident has me looking back on the past few months. Henry got home early from this month's trip on Friday. I was super excited because he doesn't have a trip until September. When he got home, he asked what I did all week. I explained all of my activities when he said, "Did you have any friends over?" I said no, and he said, "Oh, really?" I said yes, and then at that point I was really confused because I truly didn't have any friends over. He just huffed and stormed off. Again, I just assumed he was tired.